So, flares. They're probably the best thing to ever bless our planet other than, let's say, Debbie Harry. I'm so gay. Anyway, I've made 3 pairs of flares in the past and they've all turned out pretty good. So I wouldn't exactly consider myself to be an expert. However, I have developed a method of pattern drafting that works pretty well for me and hopefully it will work well for you as well. Also, a heads up, in all of the voiceovers I sound dead inside. I've recorded them at 7 a.m. and I really don't want to re-record anything. So like, I don't know, put up with it. Anyway, let's begin. We'll start by adding our vertical measurements. The line at the top is serving as my waistline. Note that I'll be subtracting 1 inch from all my vertical measurements, and this is because I'm adding a 1.5 inch waistband. First, mark out your hip line and then your crotch line, which can be taken by sitting on a hard surface and measuring from your waist to that surface. 3 inches down from here, mark out your thigh line. Now mark out your knee line and your ankle line, which will be the overall length of your flares. So now we're on to our horizontal measurements. I'll be starting from the ankle line as this is my widest circumference. However, if you have wider hips, you may want to start from the hip line. Either way, don't stress because you can always add more pattern paper. Take your desired ankle circumference, which for me is 26 inches, divide it by 2 and place this measurement on the ankle line. Mark the midpoint of this, then connect it upwards so it passes all your vertical lines, and this will create our centre line. At the knee line, take your knee circumference, divide it by 2, and distribute this evenly on either side of the centre line. I'll do this by folding my tape measure in half. Connect these 2 points to the ankle line. Now move on to the thigh line, take your thigh circumference, divide it by 2, and distribute it the same way as you did on the knee line. Smooth out the pointed edges using a French curve. Now we'll move up to the hip line. Take your hip circumference, but this time divide it by 4 and distribute it along the centre line. On one side of the centre line, transfer this point to the waistline and connect these 2 points. Now, from here, mark out your waist circumference divided by 4 and connect this point to your other hip point using a curved line. Transfer your hip marking onto the crotch line, which you'll extend by 2.5 inches. Connect this using a curved line to the line drawn between the hip and waist, and then to the thigh line. Take out a fresh sheet of pattern paper and trace out your entire pattern, including all the vertical and horizontal lines you've drawn. Now add 1/2 inch seam allowance all around. However, I excluded the top, which had already been accounted for by my waistband. Now that we've got our front panel, we can work on the back. Start by extending the crotch line by 2 inches, then bring the waistline 1 inch upwards. Connect these 2 points using a French curve. You will also want to connect your new waist point to the waistline. As this is the back panel, we'll be adding a dart. Find the centre point of your new waistline and mark this out. Now measure 1/2 inch on either side of this centre point. Draw a line down from the centre point that will measure 3 or 4 inches depending on how wide your hips are, and then connect this to the 1/2 inch markings. On either side of the knee line, go out by 1/2 inch. Connect this upwards to the crotch point and to the thigh line, and then downwards towards the ankle line. As we did on the front panel, add 1/2 inch of seam allowance, then you can cut this panel out. Now we're on to drafting the waistband. I've always found that using a straight waistband leads to gaping at the back, and so to combat this, I'll show you how to draft a curved waistband. Mark out horizontally your waist measurement, and then go up by how wide you want your waistband to be, which in my case is 1.5 inches. Square out these 2 measurements to create a rectangle. Mark out your centre point as well as 1/4 and 3/4 along your waistband. Next to each of these lines you've drawn, mark out 1/4 inch to the right. Cut out the entire rectangle. Along all of the downwards lines, cut down almost all the way to create a pivot. Connect this so it touches the 1/4 inch marking and then tape it in place. Repeat this step for all 3 of the pivots that you have created. Now that you've done this, your waistband should be curved. Trace it out onto your pattern paper and smooth out all the edges. On one side, add 2 inches for joining allowance, then add 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Finally, we're on to drafting the zip flying shield. The length of the zip I'm using is 6 inches, so I'll mark this far downwards. The fly will be 1.5 inches wide, and in order to create the curved shape, use a French curve. Add 1/2 inch of seam allowance all around. Similarly, the fly will be 6 inches long and 1.5 inches wide, however it will just be a rectangle. As the shield will be cut on the fold, you only need to add seam allowance to 3 sides. Okay, so now we have our finished pattern. Have fun making your flares, have fun becoming a 70s girl, or even becoming Mick Jagger. You'll hear from this rat hopefully some point in the future, if I'm still alive, I suppose.